Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to welcome Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust at the Department of Justice, Jonathan Kanter. Mr. Kanter has lifelong roots in New York. Born and raised in Queens, he graduated from SUNY Albany before attending law school at Washington University in St. Louis. I was actually in Queens yesterday for my son's high school graduation. We will be happy to have you back in New York once you're done with your service here. Throughout his career, Mr. Kanter has practiced law at the FTC. He learned the ways of large corporations in the private sector and eventually started a firm dedicated to antitrust enforcement. In 2021, he was nominated by President Biden to lead the DOJ's Antitrust Bureau. There, he leads a division of more than 800 people, including lawyers, economists, and data scientists. His investigations and prosecutions of big tech companies, including Apple and Google, represent a new muscular era for the long tradition of antitrust enforcement in the United States. I'm delighted and honored to introduce the Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division, Jonathan Kanter.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for that warm introduction, Kai, and thank you to Open Markets and to The Guardian for hosting today's conference and for all the work that you're doing to help elevate this conversation, which is absolutely essential. Without it, we cannot get to the bottom of these issues and start to really have a solutions-oriented approach to addressing the concentration problem that we're all confronting. And so I'm happy to be here today and to be a part of this important conversation. It's difficult to imagine a topic in our world that is more important. The free flow of information and the exchange of ideas is the lifeblood of our cultural lives and democracy. Humans need connection to one another like they need air and water. And democracy needs citizens, people, to exchange information and ideas. And that is what democracy is all about. Competing ideas in a debate that plays out freely over time. With freedom of thought and expression, democracy can thrive. In contrast, the first goal of a king or a tyrant is to control thought and information. And that is why our founders made freedom of speech the very first right protected in our Bill of Rights. They understood deeply and personally that threats to free speech and to a free press could pose to the marketplace of ideas on which democracy depends. Ben Franklin was not just a champion of a free press and free speech, but a journalist and a publisher himself. He committed to that work because he believed in, and I quote, the sacred liberty of the press, close quote, and, quote, the liberty of discussing the propriety of public measures and political opinions, close quote. So the Constitution fervently protected the public from government control of the press and of speech. In the modern era, there are new threats to the marketplace of ideas. The founders could not have imagined, nor should they have had to, private corporations with the power of governments to shape, control, or stifle freedom of speech on a national scale. It was just inconceivable in an era where the town square was literally a town square. The only electric bottleneck that Ben Franklin ever encountered was tied between a kite and a key. And certainly he could not have imagined that one day that wire, or one like it, would carry every Federalist paper, all of journalism, all debate, and every kind of connection among people. If he had, I suspect Franklin would have immediately seen the threat that we face today. If a single platform or a small number of platforms of ones and zeros hosts and controls the marketplace of ideas, whoever controls that platform controls our thoughts and our lives and our democracy cannot survive. Today we are confronting that challenge. The rise of dominant platforms in the marketplace of ideas threatens journalism, threatens the exchange of information, the exchange in the marketplace of ideas. Powerful corporations that stand between people and writers, musicians, artists, and journalists exert enormous control and influence. This is a dynamic that is playing out in many different areas. I would like to today talk about journalism, publishing, and AI specifically. These are industries where dominant intermediaries act as gatekeepers to the information commons, the modern version of the public square. But as gatekeepers, they have the ability to extract more than their fair share from all sides of the market. But this is about so much more than price or output of these products and services. What is at stake is speech itself. Private corporations decide what ideas are worthy, whose voices are amplified, and what messages are disseminated and to whom. What is at stake is the very way in which people gather information and make decisions, and the very existence of people who live to share their ideas, thoughts, and creations. Competition between many platforms means a small number of dominant players do not have outsized power over speech, over ideas, over news, and over information. And when there are more competitors, journalists and content creators have more opportunities to bargain for the value of their creations, and consumers have the ability, importantly, to vote with their feet. That is a world where people can benefit from different viewpoints and make informed decisions about how they want to live their lives. Where competition among many platforms flourishes, no one company or small number of companies can exercise control over the flow of information in our democracy. In the absence of competition, there are few, if any, incentives to offer solutions for common but serious problems. Competition can also constrain behavior and even facilitate market-based solutions, whether it be to how we fairly compensate content creators or to how to combat the spread of false information and harmful content online. And today, I would like to talk specifically about the three areas where this dynamic is playing out. Journalism. Journalism is under threat in large part due to consolidation in the advertising market. The data is staggering. 2023, an average of 2.5 news organizations closed each week. Since 2005, the country lost 1/3 of its news outlets and has lost 2/3 of its journalists in that same period. This is in no small part due to the ripple effects from changes in how advertising works. Traditionally, news organizations have relied on subscriptions and advertising to fund their reporting and to pay their journalists. But with the rise of the internet, readers increasingly turn to online aggregators and others for news. Today, the majority of Americans prefer and often get their news on a digital device rather than from traditional mediums like TV, radio, or print. And Americans now get their news from websites, searches, and social media. Social media is especially prominent, and according to a recent survey, about half of U.S. adults today get news from social media at least sometimes. This means that powerful platforms are acting as middlemen, gatekeepers between news organizations and readers. And digital advertising dollars that once went to the people who actually researched and reported on stories, now go to middlemen, rather than to the journalists and news organizations that actually do the hard work. In turn, news organizations now depend on these platforms, overly so, for the distribution of their content. They need the platforms to reach readers, and they have very little, if any, negotiating power or leverage. And without sufficient advertising revenue, independent journalism suffers. Our free press suffers. Our democracy suffers. Competition is a key piece of the puzzle toward a solution. Competition paves the way for innovation and the development of new business models and new economic relationships and opportunities. Inter-platform competition could shift the balance of power and create different bargaining dynamics for news organizations. Competition among digital advertisers can lead the way to a fairer compensation structure for those who do the on-the-ground reporting and write the articles, those who risk their lives to report on wars, those who take the time and the effort and the energy to do the research necessary to understand the dynamics that go into our political system, report on corruption. This is why a free press is so important, and this is why we need fairly compensated journalists to make sure it works. Again, what's at stake here is not just the price of accessing the news. It's about journalism itself, which is core to our values. It's about whether our society can support those journalists who are doing the hard work of separating truth from falsehood to shed light on the most important issues of the day. And without these journalists, fairly compensated, our democracy simply cannot survive. Publishing. The trend toward consolidation in book publishing, another industry necessary for ideas to flourish, is alarming. The Antitrust Division brought a successful challenge to halt the merger between Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster. These are two of the largest book publishers in the industry. The proposed merger would have consolidated the Big Five into the Big Four, further tightening the oligopoly that authors have to confront on a daily basis. But our challenge to that merger was not based on a theory of the price of books would increase due to reduced competition. It was that the merger meant that authors would receive less money, less compensation. That would not only harm the authors, but ultimately would lead to fewer books and diminish the diversity of viewpoints, as fewer authors, professional authors, would invest or could invest the time and effort to write the next bestseller, or frankly, to write the next book that helps disseminate news, information, ideas. Authors and books are more than just economic units. They are vital to the marketplace of ideas and our public discourse. Our victory in that case, which I'm extremely proud of, protected vital competition for books. It was a victory for authors, for readers, and for the free exchange of ideas. And we must remain vigilant. Artificial intelligence. Let's, last but not least, turn to AI. AI will and is reshaping information and content. It's going to change the way we consume information, including news, and will affect the way in which content is created, developed, and it's going to change the way we interact with information. It's already starting to do so. Without meaningful competition, the same threats that plague journalism, advertising, and book publishing will spread to other content creation markets. Generative AI leverages human creations. Journalists, authors, artists, musicians, all types of human creativity become inputs to large-scale models that can swallow up and regurgitate their work, often with no attribution and no compensation. AI carries the potential to create dominant companies that exploit monopsony power at levels that we have never seen before in our lifetimes or in world history. a dominant buyer for all of the world's ideas. But what incentives will there be to create if the ideas of our writers, our actors, and entertainers can simply be taken without just compensation and through the exercise of monopsony power? What incentives will there be for journalists to seek out the truth when their work is uncompensated or not adequately compensated? And what does it mean for our society if we cannot protect those who live to share the ideas of creativity with the world? The future of free expression on how we answer these questions depends on how we answer these questions as a society. And our democratic values, our freedom, depends on our ability to preserve this marketplace and opportunity for the distribution of ideas. God bless you. We must do all we can to promote competition and innovation in the industries necessary for the ideas and democracy to flourish. It is critical that we have conversations like the one we're having today, that we address these problems at a time when it's meaningful to do so, and when the impact can be felt before it is too late. Thank you for having me today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Those impassioned remarks and about your concern for the future of our industry. We appreciate it. You talked about some of the strong actions that you've taken to combat abuses of tech companies. I know you're litigating 2 monopolization cases against Google and now 1 filed recently against Apple. And you talked about the case that you brought involving Simon & Schuster. One of the things that we know, and you mentioned this in your remarks about AI, is that it requires vast amounts of data. And there was an article, a deeply reported article in the Times a couple of months ago that talked about the corners that some of the AI companies have taken in order to acquire that vast amount of data that's required. And there was a mention of the fact that Meta, when faced with the reality that they would not have enough data to effectively compete, they thought, against OpenAI, had considered buying Simon & Schuster. So I'm interested in your thoughts on whether we should be concerned that the same giant companies that dominate the internet and the tech center, including Google, Microsoft, and Meta, will seek to dominate the AI sector to the detriment of competition and potentially innovation. And what can antitrust enforcers do about that?
Sure. So I think when you have a market that is driven by data, for example, concentration in the markets of today can determine how much competition we can expect in the markets of the future. It is often iterative. And so if the cost of doing business, even the table stakes, are to have massive stores of data, even just to consider innovating, to consider entering, to consider competing, then there are only going to be a small, very small number of players who can even imagine or consider showing up and entering a market. And then beyond that, when the data becomes a flywheel, and the more you have, the more of an advantage you get, and the harder it is for others to compete, those are the kinds of dynamics that will inevitably lead to markets that are prone to tipping, markets that are prone to concentration, markets that are prone to monopoly problems or oligopoly problems. And these are just market realities. Even setting aside whether it's good, bad, or something in between, they're market realities. And if we're going to be antitrust enforcers, we have to start with understanding how the market works and work backwards from that.
On the flip side, there are other people who might say that this is an industry that is too new, too nascent of a technology for antitrust intervention right now, and that the market shares are too uncertain to determine whether there's any competitive problem right now. What is your view? What's the role of antitrust regulation in an emerging technology market?
Listen, these are mature companies that we're often talking about with long track records and massive amounts of wealth, capital, and power. To the extent that markets that should be contestable are not because companies are exercising that power, that's exactly why the antitrust laws exist. And facts matter. We need to enforce the antitrust laws based on the facts and the law, but doing so at a time when it's meaningful, at a time when we can preserve competition, because it's a lot easier to preserve it before it's too far gone than it is to try to clean it up many, many years later.
That makes sense. I was looking at the interview that you gave with DealBook earlier this week, and you were asked about AI, and you talked about your role being to keep pace with technological developments. I know on our end, to the extent we're looking into some of the issues relating to the copyright infringement, we're speaking to lawyers that have pretty specific backgrounds, some of whom have PhDs in machine learning and computer science. I'm interested to know what your division is doing to make sure that you have the people with the expertise necessary to adequately enforce these particular technological developments.
It's such an important question. We can't understand how markets work unless we have people who are capable of understanding how markets work. And so the antitrust division, we have some of the most talented professionals I've ever had the honor of working alongside in my life. But as these markets become more technical, we're going to need data scientists. We're going to need a new generation of experts who can work alongside us and help us understand and untangle how these technologies operate so that we can make well-informed decisions and that we can enforce the law in a way that relies on a deep and accurate understanding of how these markets function.
Do you have any challenge recruiting people with that particular area of expertise?
So I will say one of the wonderful things about working at the Department of Justice is we have access to some of the most talented, brilliant people ever. I've seen throughout my career that DOJ always attracts the cream of the crop, and that it holds true today. But there's in the antitrust division a mission-driven energy. People are going into antitrust not just because it's interesting, it is, not just because it's challenging, it is, and not just because it's a satisfying career, which it definitely is, but because it matters. People understand the connection between antitrust enforcement and the well-being of our society. And that is attracting some of the brightest, most talented, most energetic people for the right reasons. And I'm really, really proud, and I'm really, really excited at the level of talent that we're able to recruit across our entire program, including data scientists.
That's very encouraging. So one of the things you said at the end of your remarks was the challenge of combating misinformation, and in particular, the challenge of AI-generated content contributing to misinformation, and thereby threatening democracy. What's the role of antitrust enforcement in addressing that?
Competition means accountability. If companies are concerned that somebody's going to do it better, that someone's going to leave, that their approach might lead to dissatisfaction, they work harder. They work harder to respond. We all see it. If you're in the news business and you're concerned that someone else is going to get your scoop, you're going to redouble your efforts and you're going to work even harder to make sure that you report that story. It's basic human nature. It's why we have antitrust laws. It's why we believe that competition can help drive the kind of behavior that makes things better for all of us. It's accountability. It's choice. It's different pathways to things that you're interested in seeing and reading and understanding. It's a beautiful thing when it works, but it's terrifying when there's not enough. And so there are certainly many disciplines in our legal system that will come into play in the context of AI. My job is to focus on antitrust. But without a competitive, healthy marketplace, we will not see the kind of opportunity, we will not see the kind of growth, we will not see the kind of free flow of information that we depend on in a democratic society that we expect and that we need in order to maintain our way of life.
Thank you. I think we certainly agree with that. I think that's all the time that we have. Please join me in thanking Jonathan Kanter.
Thank you.